although I haven't actually seen it, I've heard of some optometrists who are definitely billing fraudulently. Don't do that. But yeah, fraud is bad. But that's really what they're looking for. They're looking
coming from an insurance from somebody who is constantly analyzing charts. Fraud is bad. Let's take that. That's a take-home moneymaker right there.
That's the take-home message. Fraud is bad. Yes.
Welcome to the Power Hour. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman. I've got an insightful guest for you today. And just as a reminder, make sure you subscribe on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, just to make sure you stay updated when we release a new show. So I lecture at a variety of conferences, and I don't think that billing and coding has ever been the sexiest topic on the roster at a conference. And yet, we all know it's necessary. And quite frankly, we may even recognize that we could be so much better at it. But how much money are we really leaving on the table? So to get some insights, I brought on Dr. Viktoria Davis. While she runs an interesting practice in Minnesota, she also trains practices and doctors in getting paid more for the work that you're doing by the insurance companies. And so in this episode, we talk a lot about billing, specifically medical insurance billing, not vision plans. We talk about common underbilling, the most underbilled services, how much that's costing your practice. Dr. Davis also shares her opinion on level 4 and level 5 codes, and also where you might be exposing yourself to audit risks. Bottom line, we spend the episode focused on things you need to do to get paid and get paid more for your time and work while dealing with medical insurance companies. So Dr. Davis also talks about a friendly audit. And if you're on YouTube watching, you're seeing me do the air quotes. So this friendly audit from the Power practice that you can sign up for called the Power Audit. And I think the service was just made available to the general optometric community. Previously, it was only just for Power practice members. So the Power Audit, you send 10 charts, medical, non-vision plan charts, and you have a billing and coding expert go through them all with a fine-tooth comb to find all of your opportunities. In my opinion, you should sign up for this audit if you're doing any meaningful medical billing or planning to do more medical billing in your practice, because you want to do two things: protect the practice and make more money. And the audit that they do on your charts will show you exactly how to do that. Anyway, we're going to drop a link to the Power Audit on the Power Practice website. And as always, I'm excited to hear your feedback on today's episode. Okay, so let's jump in. All right, Dr. Viktoria Davis, welcome to the Power Hour. Pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I think we have a lot to talk about on demystifying some of the billing stuff. But before we get there, talk to me a little bit about your background so that our listeners know who they're talking to and really how you became an expert in billing and coding.
Sure. First of all, it's kind of not a surprise to anybody who knows me that I love details and I love every sort of detail that's involved in things. And so billing and coding is kind of a natural place for me to fall into there. So I am like the epitome of your type A personality. So that fits in pretty well there. So I am an optometrist in rural Minnesota. I have a private practice in a small town of about 2,400 people. My entire county has about 10,000. So when I say small and rural, that's what I mean. We have no stoplights. And so yes, small town. I'm the only eye care provider around for at least 15 miles. So I see a little bit of everything. I say that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of hopefully something. Because I do see everything. That means that I also need to bill for everything. A large percentage of my population is elderly, which means that they are sick, they have diabetes, they have high blood pressure, they have glaucoma. I have to be completely comfortable treating these things. I have farmers who poke themselves in the eyes with corn stalks and sometimes wind up shooting little metal bits into their eye. And so I have to know what to do with all of this stuff. So to know what to do with that, a lot of that also becomes to be fairly compensated for what I am doing and accurately compensated for that.
So and how long have you had your practice?
Yep, I've been in practice for 25 years. And I realized quite early on that about 50% of my income was derived from services, primarily to medical insurance companies. So it seemed like it made sense to learn how to do that fairly and accurately so that I could get the most out of them that I could for doing the services that I'm providing.
Right. And I know that you speak about medical billing. I know that you are in charge of the medical billing and audit team at the Power practice. So you figured this out quite quite well. Where do you think your expertise, outside of just doing it yourself and kind of figuring all this stuff out, where are some of the places that you've learned from as you've developed this level of expertise?
So a lot of what I started out with was self-taught. A lot of just learning how things worked and learning where the resources were available to be able to read to find out more information about it. After that, when I really became interested in it and it became something that I was doing on a regular basis, as far as becoming an expert, I became a certified evaluation and management auditor, which is through an organization called the National Association of Medical Auditors, where you take a test and study and take a test that shows that you know what you're doing with evaluation and management auditing. So I did that and I passed my test. And so I am a certified evaluation and management auditor. I do speaking as far as kind of information on billing and coding. And as you mentioned, I am a consultant for and the director of billing and coding services for the Power practice.
Yeah. So, and you've even gone as far as basically not taking any vision plans inside of your practice, and it's all medical, right? Your whole practice is medical?
Correct. There isn't really a basically about it. We are not in network providers for any of the vision plans. We are for our state medical assistants and things like that, because part of our practice philosophy and part of our mission statement is caring for the less fortunate. And so we are providers for our state medical assistants, which does include some product, but that's the only quote vision plan or the only product associated plan that we are in network providers for.
What was the decision like when you first dropped? I imagine you dropped VSP and IMED at some point. What was that decision like for you?
So let's see. When I first started here, I was back 25 years ago. My office, I was an associate, and I started the practice here as a satellite of a practice in the town that's about 20 miles away. I bought this location myself about 3 years into that. And the first thing that I did was drop IMED. And the second thing I did was drop VSP. And at that point, the reason why I really did that was because, well, the IMED side of things, well, both of them actually, was because I didn't like having the control over, not having control over the product. When you had to send it to their labs and they had to decide what they were going to do, and I couldn't offer that quality to my patients that I was really trying to hang my hat on. I also really, really hated how complicated their billing was and how complicated it was to figure out how to explain this to patients. It just seemed ridiculously difficult to me. This was pre internet things, so you had to look up all this stuff and the big binders. And I'm aging myself here, but it was not fun. And my staff was incredibly happy. And when we got the letter from VSP that said that they had dropped us, we framed it and put it on the wall.
Nice. Nice. That's definitely, I would say, a gutsy move. And at the same time, so just to make sure I understand, if somebody walks into your practice today for an eye exam, you're billing their Blue Cross, Blue Shield, or
Correct.
whatever insurance that they have.
Correct. We are a little bit lucky in Minnesota that we have. Minnesota is fairly progressive as far as insurance goes, and many of our employer-sponsored plans, so like those Blue Cross Blue Shields and Medica and things like that, many of those medical plans do have a benefit for an eye exam on there, not for any product, but for the services portion of things, and that is
Mm-hmm.
definitely helpful and something which I have learned is somewhat unique to Minnesota, but there's no product benefit on any of those.
Got it. So then your optical is basically selling the product cash pay
Correct.
to the patient. Got it.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
great. So, obviously you've established this expertise from a medical billing standpoint. And I guess where I want to start is maybe at the back, which is, I know that you audit charts all the time, and that's part of your role at the Power practice, and people are making mistakes all the time. And what I want to start with with some of the biggest mistakes that people are making, and really the mistakes that are costing them money in their practice. So talk about that first.
So when I do what we call a power audit, or basically it's a friendly audit where uh, people will send 10 charts, and then I will look at them all extensively. I grade them on all sorts of different categories. I very carefully look at their documentation to make sure that they have accurate and adequate documentation. And then based on that chart documentation, then I look at and go through and figure out what services could or should have the chart supports, really. So what could or should have been billed. Like I say, really the best way to say it is what does the chart support? Then I compare that to what they actually billed on it and see how much difference there is. Out of
Okay, so first question.
Mhm.
Of the 10 charts that are sent to you, if you're auditing an average 10 charts, how many of those 10 charts have something that you catch or could have been better?
At least 9.
9 charts out of 10.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so let's go back to the original question, which is where am I leaving? Because I imagine there are some places where I'm not leaving money on the table, but it just maybe improper documentation. But where am I leaving money on the table if I'm the average practice?
So the biggest two things that I see are poor documentation and inaccurate or inappropriate office call billing. And the poor documentation is something we can maybe get into that a little bit later as far as the effect that EHRs have had on documentation, both positive and negative. But some of that, some of my colleagues just document very badly, and that poor documentation really can dramatically affect what the chart supports. So that's kind of the first part of it, as far as not necessarily leaving money on the table, but the overbilling side of it. If your chart doesn't support what you're billing, the old adage, if it wasn't charted, it wasn't done, is 100% true. And if your chart doesn't support it, then you shouldn't bill it. As
All
far
right,
as
so we're going to come back to that one for sure.
Yes. As far as underbilling, the biggest thing that I see is, in my opinion, my colleagues in general don't value themselves very well. They don't value their services very well, and they are terrified of billing what we call the level 4 and 5 codes. And in all of medicine, there are 5 different levels of office visits. So when you go in to see your, general doctor because your throat hurts or whatever, they look at your condition, and after they provide the services, or while they're providing their services, they look at how complicated that visit was for them. And based on how complicated that level is, they pick which of those 5 levels of visit it is, and that's what they bill. We do the same thing in eye care, or we can and we should. And it's a matter that basically the levels are frequently misguided or misdirected. Optometrists very much think that the kind of levels that we really use 4 of them, because they sort of took away the lowest level, but they're straightforward, low, moderate, and high levels. And optometrists are terrified to use even those moderate levels when a lot of the conditions that we treat can be that moderate level rather than the low level. The difference in reimbursement between a moderate and a low winds up being about $40, which, if you're only getting paid, $75 for your full eye exam from a vision plan, $40 from one patient that you see for an office call can make a pretty big difference in your practice.
Yeah, that's 50%, or multiply that times 100 patients a month. That's $50,000 a year.
Right.
That's not insignificant. But what are some examples of services that you think should be moderate, rather, or that people tend to underbill for?
Right. So there are very, very detailed instructions and very detailed information that is publicly available as far as how to decide what these codes are. And it used to be a case up until the beginning of 2021 was when they went through and completely redid how to assign and how to pick these codes. It used to be based off of, you had to have certain aspects of your exam that were included. You had to have certain aspects of your history that were included. And it was all a kind of a checklist sort of thing. Now it's all based off what they call medical decision making. And I kind of tear that down to how hard do you have to think about this? And that's something which is sometimes doctors have trouble with that because they have trouble with proving that or documenting that or things like that, but it's not that challenging to say, this was a really complicated thing that took a lot of, I had to consider a lot of different diagnoses, or I had to look at a lot of different diagnoses and things like using medication management. That's something which is more complicated than not. Not complicated as in it's difficult, but there's more things we have to consider. Is the patient allergic to anything? What other medications are they taking? You've got a glaucoma patient, and, even if you're keeping them on the same medications, you have to make sure they're not having side effects from them and things like that. And that brings it up into a more complicated level of medical decision making. Probably specifically, some of the most common things that I see is there got to be based off of the old nomogram of number of things you do in the exam determining what level it was. People think that anybody who comes in with something with the front of the eye needs to be a low level or a level 3 exam. And if it's the back of the eye and you dilate the eye or whatever, it's a level 4. And that's really not true at all. There's a lot of level 3 kind of things, corneal ulcers, corneal abrasions, things like that. Again, stuff that you're looking at and considering what might happen and considering medication and things like that, which really should be billed at that moderate level 4. The other thing that I see that's missed a lot is, as much as optometrists are afraid to bill that level 4, and I do one of my lectures, it's called Don't Fear the 4. I try and put a little bit of humor into it, but is that level 5 or high complexity exam is something that optometrists are very, very afraid of. And the way that we frequently can get that level 5 exam is, as well as on medical decision making, that determination of code can actually also alternatively be based on time. So I certainly have in my practice some of these patients who just take a lot of time. They take a lot of time. They take a lot of hand holding. They've got a chart that's 3 inches thick, and you've got a lot of stuff that you have to review on them. You've got a lot of time you have to spend with them. You've got a lot of hand holding you have to do. Maybe you have to call their daughter and talk to their daughter about things. All of that time can also be considered, alternatively be considered in billing. And those are times when you can get up to that level 5 service. And again, as long as it's documented in your chart and you can justify it, then that's a perfectly legitimate billing.
So, in how much time, by the way, do you think dictates a level 5?
A level 5 is dictated. It depends a little bit on whether it's a new patient or whether it's an existing patient. In other words, whether you've seen them before. But for an existing patient, somebody you've seen in your practice before, anything over 40 minutes is a level 5 exam. And that's not necessarily 40 minutes with the patient. That includes the time you spent reviewing their record, doing your charting. It's all doctor time, but it's not. It is fortunately somewhat unusual that I spend 40 minutes with a patient, but not certainly unheard of.
Yeah. So why are doctors so afraid to bill 4s and 5s?
Audits. That is absolutely, in a word, why people are afraid to do things. The word audit brings, like, the optometrists think of it as the fires of hell coming up to leach their soul out of them. and there are certainly things that a lot of other lecturers have said, be careful doing this because it's an audit flag. My theory and the way that I operate is, if you're billing properly and appropriately, why are you afraid of an audit? You shouldn't be afraid of an audit. I've had clients who are audited. I haven't been audited myself by medical insurances. I have by tax agencies. The Minnesota Provider Tax Agency, who told me that I knew so much more about this program than anybody they'd seen, that I should teach everybody else about it because I knew more than they did about it. So
Nice.
I guess that says something. But I really feel that you shouldn't be afraid of an audit. My advice to any of my clients, or really anybody who is subject to an audit, is the last thing you want to do as a doctor is handle your charts at that point. What's done is done. And my recommendation is have a staff member pull the appropriate charts, send the information off, because all that's going to happen from you looking at them at this point is your anxiety level is going to go up. and and none of us need that. So the best thing that you can do is be confident in your charts and be confident in your billing, so that if and when you do get that notice of an audit, then you can say, okay, I believe that it's all correct.
Well, and it sounds to me like what's really important for an audit is proper documentation
Absolutely.
for the things that you've been billing, and it can cost the practice a lot of money if you don't
Yes.
have proper documentation, right? Can you explain that a
Absolutely.
little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So when an auditor is looking at a chart, they don't have the patient in front of them. They don't have you as the doctor in front of them or anything. All they're doing is they're looking at your documentation and saying what was done, looking at what was done, and looking at how they can follow your thought process. So starting from the beginning of the exam, that's starting even from, case history. What did you do based on that chief complaint of the patient? And then down, that's gathering your exam findings. And then what did you think about? What were things that you considered when you were making your diagnosis and your plan and bringing those together? Very frequently, that documentation, that sequence of the exam is very, very unclear in charts. If a patient says, if their reason for visit is they have glaucoma, but you didn't check their pressures and you didn't look in the back of the eye, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. That doesn't fit with things. Similarly, if you come in with a patient who has, their only chief complaint is, a dry eye follow up, and you do a complete dilated exam, and why did you do that? What was your thought process there? There needs to be something that shows why you did things. And that's a lot of what's missing a lot in charts is documentation.
hmm and you mentioned that technology or EHRs have had an impact on this.
They definitely have. They've had both a positive and a negative impact. The positive impact on the of the EHR is that most people can type a lot faster than they can write, and handwrite things. And obviously, typed information is a lot more readable than handwritten information is.
hmm
Again, I'll age myself by saying that I have seen handwritten doctor's notes that exam forms that I can't read. Typically you can read things that are on EHR. So that is very, very nice, particularly as an auditor. Trying to figure out what Dr. Scrawl means is just awful. But so that has certainly helped as far as legibility. Also, as far as being able to look back in the patient record as the doctor and see what it is that you've seen before, see that change over time. That's something that EHR has really helped with a lot. However, the part that EHR has not helped with is what we auditors call the bring forward paradox. And what that is that most EHRs have some sort of button that you can use to bring forward the previous exam, basically copy the data from a previous exam. This is really, really helpful in that you can easily compare data. It's also very, very harmful in that you can accidentally record data for things you didn't do, or continue to bring forward things that aren't there anymore without changing them. I've seen charts where a patient has a corneal abrasion in the same place for 4 years in a row. Um, that's probably not actually true. The corneal abrasion probably healed, and then it's just a problem of bring forward. And when doctors don't look at that documentation well enough to see what actually is recorded in the EHR. So it does have both positive and negative points to it, as long as you're very, very careful with that bring forward. One thing that
hmm
I always recommend with any EHR is that you only bring forward the screen that you're looking at that time, because that way it's easier to track what it is. If you bring forward and pull forward an entire exam, it's much more complicated, much more difficult to make sure that everything that's being recorded is actually accurate.
hmm So, in your experience, when you're thinking about what people tend to fail to document, it's kind of it sounds like it's the thought process, it's the logic, it's the steps that were taken that people fail to document.
A lot of times it is, not exclusively. I've seen times when they'll bill for a service which isn't even charted. Um, Particularly regarding imaging or some of our special testing and things like that that we do. And they'll bill for it because they did it, but they forgot to actually chart that they did it. And if it's not charted, it wasn't done.
Hmm. Makes sense. So in thinking about how how an audit can impact a practice,
Mhm.
because there's this whole thing of, well, you can make more money by properly billing, but you can also lose a lot of money by improperly billing, right?
Yes, and this is one of the reasons why people are so afraid of audits, is because they're so afraid of these multi-thousand-dollar, you know, uh, audit results. By multi-thousand, I mean then you owe the insurance company for that multi-thousand-dollars. The
How do
way
they
that
figure that out?
the way that insurance companies work with things is that they extrapolate the data. So say that they ask for 100 of your charts, which that would be horrible because but that makes math easier. So say they ask for 100 of your charts and they see the same problem in 20 of those charts. They are then going to say that that problem exists not in just those 20 charts, but in 20% of all of your charts that they paid for that year. So if you, because of poor documentation or whatever, if you were underbilling, if you were overbilling, excuse me, by um, you know $30 on each one of these, then 30 times 20 is 600. But they're not going to come back and collect $600. They're going to collect $6,000 because they extrapolated to all 1,000 charts that they paid instead of just the 100 that they audited.
Hmm. Makes sense. So it is something where, and by the way, aren't there shortcuts, or are there shortcuts that doctors can take to make sure that their charting is done correctly? I mean, I know that there are some doctors, that clients of ours, that are constantly using scribes, and in some cases, some people. I also know that there are some people who say, "Oh, I'm just going to get all my charting done in one block of time," or something like that. What have you seen that's most successful?
So the most successful thing that I've seen by far is to have people actually reference the charts on how to bill and code, particularly regarding office calls. Even with as much billing and coding as I do, I still have there's a particular chart which is put out by the AMA, who's the one who actually makes all the rules for billing and coding. It's available just online, and I have that sitting right on my desktop on my computer. As much billing and coding as I do, I still reference that on a regular basis, just as kind of a sanity check to make sure that, I'll have a pretty good idea. Oh, yeah, I think that this was a level 3 or a level 4, but then just being able to look at that one page chart. And, we all have cheat sheets for all sorts of things. And actually utilizing that cheat sheet from the AMA is by far the most successful thing that I've seen, and understanding it as well. And that understanding maybe takes a little bit more time, but it's a wonderful resource.
Yeah, and how often does that resource change? Like
Um,
how do you?
Not very frequently. They changed it pretty significantly. In the beginning of 2021, they completely changed how they were doing things. But some of it they've made improvements to some of the definitions and things like that on it. But the basic chart really hasn't changed for the past 3 years.
Okay, so you're saying if the person in your office who's doing the billing hasn't really gotten up to speed since 2021, chances are they're really not doing it right.
Yes, if they are still billing based on the criteria from before 2021, you have lots of problems.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting to me as you're talking. I am confident that we have clients who use remote billing services,
Mhm.
and there are probably some really good things about that, and then there's probably some not so good things about that. What's your experience with remote billing operations?
So the biggest thing is that there is a separation between billing and coding. So coding is determining what code it is, what CPT codes is what they're called, are assigned to every examination. That coding is the doctor's responsibility. There are some places that, especially larger healthcare systems and things, where they have coders, and that I am hugely and completely against that, because if there is a coding problem, it's not the coder who's subject to it and who's responsible for that. it's the doctor, even if their company has a coder. So that coding side of things, the doctor should always be the one who is determining that level of code for the practice.
And does
That's
that typically happen during the exam?
during or after the exam. It's typically when the chart is completed. So
Mhm.
I should mention one of the other biggest things that I've seen is some practices never complete their charts. They never actually sign their charts, whether that
Mhm.
be an electronic signature, which means the exam wasn't done at all. And so that's a huge problem. If you don't sign your charts, then um, basically you're billing for things that never even happened at all. So that's a huge
Wow.
problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
sign your
And
charts. Always sign your charts. But typically that happens. That coding happens at the time that the chart is finalized because that's when things are done. So the doctor should be doing the coding. As far as who's doing the actual billing, which is basically the transmission of that data from your office to the insurance companies, that's something which can easily be done by remote people and what's called claim scrubbing, which is making sure that all of the right boxes are filled in and all the data is in there and things like that. Everything's in there properly. Those are easily things that can be done by staff members or remote services or things like that. But the actual coding should be done by the doctor.
so then going back to the coding component, um, so it's the doctor who's making the decision that this is a level 4 or a level 5, and
Correct.
they're doing that. It sounds to me like with limited information and a lot of fear
Yes,
associated with it as well.
there is.
And so, what information? I mean, you mentioned this chart, but what information should the doctor be really comfortable with in order to not keep leaving the money associated with these 4s and 5s on the table?
So really they should be, confident in what they're doing and they should be confident in the services that they're providing. The as I said, the chart from the AMA is an amazing resource. It's free. Everybody should have it. And they should understand what it means. Like I say, it's just a one-page spreadsheet. And being comfortable with that and not being afraid to use those codes if you've provided those services.
Hmm. Okay, good. So, as you conduct these audits on a regular basis, some of the things you're finding are things that people are underbilling for, and we've already talked a little bit about that, and we think that that's money that's being left on the table. Some of the stuff that you're finding is just poor documentation, and poor documentation leads to technically overbilling, which then could trigger a situation where the insurance company wants the money back. What else? What else are you finding, and what impact does it have on the practice?
So, some of the other big things that I find is not billing for special testing services and things like that, or
Mm.
not identifying those patients or those situations which would benefit from that special testing, things like imaging or visual fields or gonioscopy or these kind of things, that it is even standard of care to provide these things for these patients and bill for them. Um, and some practices do a really good job of it, others definitely do not. And again, if you're providing these services for a medical reason, you should absolutely bill for them. Most of these imaging services and things like that, things like OCTs and photos and visual fields, do require a written interpretation and report. And there are some guidelines on exactly what that means as well. But that's something where it's a slightly more complicated than just saying do a visual field, but it is something which isn't that hard to do to be able to bill and document for that
Yeah,
properly as
let's
well.
talk about the ROI on that. So, how much time? How sophisticated is that written interpretation need to be, and how long would it take the average doctor? It doesn't even have to be done by the doctor. Can it be done by somebody else?
Um, I don't know whether it actually it has to be signed by the doctor. There's a lot of things as far as what has to be actually written by the doctor and stuff like that. I use templates for mine. So, mine's really easy. There's so many times that we're looking at things that are basically the same. I just start with templates and then slap that into my EHR and modify a couple things, and I'm done with that evaluation and report interpretation and report in about 30 seconds. Um,
And
which is
what can you bill for that
about
imaging?
about it depends on exactly which one it is, but $50 to $75
Right. So the ROI on time
is
is
definitely there. Yes.
is definitely worth it there, even if it
Yes.
takes you a minute
Right.
and not 30 seconds.
Exactly. Even if it takes you, 3 or 4 minutes. Again, so many doctors, especially those who do accept reimbursement from vision plans, they're getting reimbursed $70 for an exam that takes them a half an hour. So if you can get reimbursed $70 for something that takes you 5 minutes, that's awesome.
Yeah, totally agree. And in thinking about that too, is that when you do when you submit the information to the insurance company, and is it likely that you are increasing an audit risk if you have imaging? Is it likely that you're increasing audit risk by anything else that you're doing?
That's a really difficult question to answer. As I've always said, and I'm kind of surprised this is the first time that this has come up in this segment, because 90% of my answers on insurance questions start with "it depends," and and in this case, it really does depend. Most insurance companies are not out to get the little optometrists; they're out to get the multi-million dollar surgeons, and they're looking for fraud. That's really what they're looking for. And I certainly have, although I haven't actually seen it, I've heard of some optometrists who are definitely billing fraudulently. Don't do that. But yeah, fraud is bad. But that's really what they're looking for. They're looking
Coming
for
from an insurance, from somebody who is constantly analyzing charts, fraud is bad. Let's take that. That's a take home moneymaker right
That's
there.
that's the take home message. Fraud is bad. Yes. And if you are trying to bill things just because you're going to make money off of them, that's probably fraud. You need to bill things because it's medically necessary and because you're doing it for the good of your patient. The fact that you
Hmm.
make money off of it is that you're getting paid for what you are doing. But there is an important distinction there, that you shouldn't bill for something just because you're going to get paid for it.
So you mentioned a little bit about specialty services, and I
Mhm.
know that dry eye, for example, is one that has a decent amount of reimbursement associated with medical billing. So talk a little bit about that. Specialty, and sometimes what we would consider be high margin or sometimes cash pay services. How can you get the benefit of both insurance and cash pay for certain services?
So that's kind of an interesting question as well. And certainly with some of the newer forms of specialty treatments, particularly for dry eye and things like that, they're things that are so new, relatively speaking, that they haven't even been evaluated as far as medical services go. Any sort of medical service that has a reimbursable code has all been evaluated by um, experts or things like that to prove that it's efficacious and that it's basically worth paying for. And a lot of our treatments have not had that sort of validation. Not saying they aren't perfectly good, and not saying you shouldn't offer those to your patients or things. It's just that they're not going to be reimbursed by insurance at this point. And so most of those are outside of that insurance game that we play. And things that are outside the insurance game are a lot easier to bill and a lot easier to deal with, because you don't have to worry about that relationship between you and the insurance company. One of the things which is most bizarre about medicine and insurance is that if you are a participating provider with an insurance company, you can't decide how much you're going to charge for something. Well, you can decide how much you're going to charge, but not how much you're going to get paid.
Right.
I use the analogy when I'm talking to people of, say that you own a grocery store and you've got 4 people in a row that are buying a gallon of milk. Well, one person, that gallon of milk, you're going to wind up getting $10 for it. The next person in line, you're going to wind up getting $2 for it. And the next person in line, you may wind up getting $6 for it. The milk costs you exactly the same, but it's just because they happen to be wearing a blue shirt that day or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's very, very strange that with insurance, we we as providers have no control over how much we get paid for things. The exception to that is those cash pay services. And those cash pay services, you can set your own fees on things, and it's completely outside of the insurance ballywick, the insurance spectrum of things.
Yeah. So, for example, in a dry eye scenario, you're saying you get billed for an exam, but then
Absolutely.
depending on the services you provide, you can decide whether it makes sense to go insurance based or cash based, depending on the service too.
Correct. There are, and sometimes, especially with patients who are on high deductible medical plans, they may choose to do it on a cash pay basis. Some of that you need to be a little bit careful with, because some of your insurance contracts say that if you're a provider with insurance company, you have to bill them for it. That's actually in the Medicare statute. So anybody who's a Medicare provider has to bill Medicare for a Medicare beneficiary services, if
Sure.
it's a covered service.
So going back to something you said earlier, you talked a little bit about your template, and as both a practicing optometrist, but also as a person who has seen lots of practices do this well, and then lots of practices do this not well, what workflows would you recommend to practices that can, whether it's save time or improve the quality of the chart, or improve the likelihood that they're going to get paid more? What are some of the workflows inside the practice that you as a consultant would suggest to people that they consider?
One of the biggest things that I would say is don't think that you're going to remember things, because you're not. We have way too many things going on in our brain, and everybody does. So, don't think that you're going to remember something about a patient and chart it later. At the very, very least, have an area of your chart where you can just jot down some notes about it. I am a huge believer in having free documentation fields in your EHR so that you can make those notes on things that you want to remember to be able to put in later. If you tell, Mrs. Martinez that she needs to, use some drops and come back for some, meibomian treatment or something like that, you don't necessarily have to chart all of that right away as far as where it's going to go in the chart. Just jot it down so that if you are doing your charting later, you're going to remember that. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I see, is that by the time that people get to charting, most people don't finish their charts when they are in the exam room. It's a great thing to be able to do, but just time-wise, it very frequently doesn't happen with practices. And just don't think that you're going to remember things.
Mm-hmm. And workflow wise, are there time saving things that people that you've seen people use, or leveraging your staff in a specific way that helps just do a better job and also get paid more for the medical patients you're seeing?
If you say the same thing multiple times to multiple patients, have templates with that, because that has just a huge impact on things. And you're basically doing the same thing. You're speaking as a template, and so if you know that you said that to them, then having those templates to be able to paste into that assessment and plan area.
You just have those like in a Word document or something that you paste them out of?
Yep, exactly. So, and that assessment and plan area is probably one of the ones which is most commonly lacking in documentation, that and case history. But the actual exam portion is usually not that bad, but the case history portion and the assessment and plan are frequently pretty lacking. So, like I say, having templates in there so that you can just say, okay, yep, this is what I told them, and this is what I was thinking about things. This is what they were advised. Interestingly, you see a lot of that, or I see a lot of that in charts from ophthalmology practices in particular. They seem to have much better concept of that templating and things like that built into their ophthalmology EHRs, which tend to be different from our optometry EHRs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I guess looking at the future of medical billing, Victoria, do you think that practices are heading in a direction of more demand for medical services or less demand? And I mean, of course, it depends on some way on where you're located and what the world really looks like. But in my opinion, I guess if I'm a listener to this podcast and I'm thinking to myself, how important is it that I brush up on all of this stuff and I really get this right if maybe only 10, 20% of my patients I'm doing medical with?
Well, our population keeps aging, and we've got all of those baby boomers who are coming up into Medicare age. Every single one of those has the opportunity to be able to be billed medically. I'm not saying every one of them is a medical exam. Every one of them has the opportunity to be billed medically, which means that, again, if you're still taking vision plans and you're seeing these seniors in particular and getting, $60, $70 for your exam, Medicare themselves, the national average for an exam is $124, and that does not count the refraction. So, that's a pretty significant chunk of change for doing the
Yeah.
exact same thing on your patients. So yeah, medical billing is vitally important for a practice. Of course, a lot of this depends on what happens legislatively and things like that as well. This is my plug for every optometrist to give money to their PAC.
And to join the AOA, right?
Yeah,
If you're not.
join the AOA, or at the very least, donate to your political action committee. Whether you like the fact that money runs our profession, it does, because money runs politics, and it does. And ophthalmologists and other doctors have a lot of money, so we need to use our power in numbers and make sure that we're adequately represented there as well. But sorry, that was my little tangent rant there.
No, but I actually, you bring up a good point, and I recall a conversation I had with a person kind of, I guess, would call it like a high-ranking member of the AOA, and we had some conversations around the fact that like ophthalmology as a profession isn't really expanding at a rate to support the needs of the patients that would sometimes traditionally be seen by an ophthalmologist for a medical procedure. So in reality, more optometrists need to develop the ability to see patients for services that can be billed to medical insurance.
Oh, absolutely. Again, I'm in a very rural area. In my area, we have such a dearth of ophthalmologists that my patients have to wait on average five months just to see an ophthalmologist for anything.
Wow.
Even procedures which optometrists in other states can do. A YAG laser procedure after cataract surgery, they have to wait 5 months to even get seen by the ophthalmologist, which is crazy. And
Wow.
so, yes, when we're able to do these procedures, we need to do them, and then we need to bill for them.
Yeah. So I think it's really you've hit the point home really well about the fact that we really, as a profession, we need to get good at the we'll call it the administrative side
Mm-hmm.
of being able to provide care that we get paid for by the insurance company. Talk about the audit that you do in a little bit more detail. What happens? How do people select the charts? And it's a friendly audit, right? It's a friendly audit, but it's an opportunity to get clarity into what you're doing well and what you're not.
It really is. So basically, what we do is that we ask clients to select 10 charts, and as far as how those are selected, ideally it's selected randomly. If you do have multiple doctors in your practice, it's nice to be able to see charts from each one of the doctors, things like that. But 10 charts that are preferably not billed to vision insurance. So preferably 10 charts that are billed to medical insurance in some way, shape, or form. Then I look at those 10 charts and grade them based on documentation requirements, and then based on what the chart supports, assign the appropriate code to that chart based on what the chart supports. And then any special testing that was done or that looks like it could have or should have been done, look at that as well, and then compare that to what was actually billed. At the end of it, after I've looked at 10 charts, they get a nice fat packet from me electronically, which usually runs to about 35 to 40 pages worth of information. This has all sorts of information on it as far as exactly what I'm looking for in those documentation requirements, and is exactly what I'm looking for. It goes through each chart and what I was looking at And interestingly, this is another thing where I use templates a lot. So, I make sure that I'm not spending, hours and hours and hours and hours on this either. I do spend quite a bit of time on each one of them, but I make it, reasonable for myself as well. So, but there's a lot of information that you derive from that. And then with the Power Audit, that also includes a time for the practice owners or the doctors to sit down with me or the practice manager with some specific questions after they've read the report on how to do things better or clarifications on what I meant.
Mm-hmm. So the follow-up for clients, because it seems like, it's as exciting as it may be to get a 35-page packet on how you screwed up your billing, right? But I imagine that there needs to be action and change that happens in the practice. So what are the types of things that typically you see people doing better as a result of doing this Power Audit?
A lot of it is just education. That's my goal, is to be able to educate people so that they understand what they're doing more. That they understand what the AMA spreadsheet means. The AMA table of office calls, level medical decision making means. That they understand that they can bill and they should bill for when they do refractions on people. That they understand, what's required as far as those special testing interpretations and reports go. So I really have seen changes in those, how well they're doing things and how much they are, how much more comfortable they are with their billing and coding.
Yeah, and I imagine it's not just the doctor; it's also the staff that supports the doctor that gets benefit from that as well.
Well, anytime the practice makes more money, the staff should be able to benefit from that as well.
Yeah, of course. So. And the Power Audit is available, I believe, not just to Power Practice members anymore.
Right.
It's also available to the general to the general populace of optometrists. I think they've just opened this up, so it's kind of interesting to see. Power Practice members tend to self-select as a group, and they say, "Okay, hey, this is how I want to run my practice, and I need help with that." I would be interesting to see what it looks like now that things have opened up, and the rest of the optometric community can send you their reports so you can do this Power Audit, or their charts so you can do this Power Audit on them and see whether your 90% improvement rate stays, or maybe goes to 95 or something like that. Could go down. Let's be optimistic too.
Yes. No, it will. It'll be very interesting. And certainly those Power Audits are now open to anybody, and they can just go to the Power Practice website, and there's information on that from there.
Yeah. And I think this has been such an illuminating conversation, because everybody does this, right? Or everybody should do this. And it's an opportunity for everyone in any doesn't matter where you practice. It's still an opportunity to take a deeper look at something in your practice where you have probably some vulnerabilities, and say, okay, am I making these mistakes? And do I want to get better at this? Well, I probably should for the future of my practice. And this is such a great resource.
Thank you. No, billing and coding is something that a lot of people think is dry and boring. And my response to that is, do you think money is dry and boring? And
does making money, do you like gold bricks?
Exactly.
This has been great, Viktoria. Thank you so much for everything you've contributed. And of course, we'll post some information in the show notes about how to get access to the Power Audit that you talked about. But I think this has just been really helpful and useful information for anybody who's running a practice and needs to see patients and do a better job of making more money from those patients, being paid fairly for the work that you're doing.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
If you're enjoying the Power Hour, you might be asking yourself, what can I do today in my practice that's going to make an impact? So over the years, the practice coaches and consultants at the Power Practice have helped thousands of practices improve. And they often start with one thing, and that's a proprietary methodology called the Practice Profitability Audit. For about $2,400, they look at all of your practice numbers and they stack them up against where a practice of your size could and should be. It takes about a week for them to do. And because they're so experienced, they know what your potential looks like. And they're often able to take that $2,400, multiply it several times over, and hand it right back to you in found profits in your practice in months, not years, in months. But you get to keep the much more profitable practice for years afterwards. But here's the best news. I'm going to tell you how you can have the practice profitability audit completely free. See, we're really trying to get people onto the show website, which is, by the way, powerpractice.com. And then you click the Power Hour podcast button. The reason we want you there is because I want the audience participation. I want to hear your feedback, and I want to know how to make the show better for you. So you can interact with us, send us your feedback, offer your suggestions. And for a limited time, when you go there, you can also request a practice profitability audit for free. Right. We're going to cover 100% of the cost, but only for 5 people per month. And 5 people per month is all we really have capacity for, because this is a resource intensive audit and the Power Practice coaches are generally busy serving their clients. But for 5 people a month, they've agreed to cover 100% of the cost. So it's totally free to you. So again, take action immediately in your practice. Go to powerpractice.com, click on the Power Hour podcast, interact with us, but also request a practice profitability audit today.